We're here at it's about 9 a.m. on Pacific time with Isaac Mars. He's an author and a theoretical physicist. And thank you for coming on, Isaac. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure, it's a pleasure to be here, Laura. Thank you for the invitation and thank you for being a part of this Eternal Now moment. My name is Isaac, and I am proposing the Universal Natural Intelligence Theory of Energetics, which is my book titled Unity Theory for the short version. So during my awakening, we could call it a spiritual awakening, but it's also a scientific and logical awakening as well. I realized the orders within orders and the patterns within patterns that constitute our reality, specifically here at the human level, and how we have been using our own abilities as beings living in a holographic universe to actually keep ourselves in suffering on the collective level. So when I realized how the universe worked and that the 12 universal laws are very real, such as the law of attraction and repulsion, I was able to see through this veil of illusion and find a way to describe it to other people as well in order to create a clearer path forward for mankind. So I just decided at the beginning of last year to start following my intuition and my heart. If my theories were true, then I would see them reflected back to me in this experiment in which I was the subject. And that's exactly what happened. I started realizing that the more that I put out unconditional love, the more that the universe reflected that back to me. And after some purging of some fearful experiences and energies, it just became so effortless for me to live in this way. And so that's what I've been doing. I've been speaking at conferences. I've been having interviews like with Laura here, and that's my path now. The doors are open. It's just up to me whether or not I walk through them. So that's a little bit about how I got started.
Great. And just to say, it's a plug, but of course, but your book is amazing. I read it cover to cover in like 2 or 3 nights, and it just flowed really easily and made a lot of sense for me. And, I kind of grew up watching that show, The Universe, with theoretical physicists on there, and so it just really spoke to me. And you just tied together everything about like the dark energy, and everything just made sense to me.
Mm.
So
That
if you
means a
can
lot
go,
to me because that is it's a hard thing for most people to grasp, I'd say, the dark energy and the dark matter aspects in my book. Um, so for your viewers, maybe I could explain a little bit about that to get them interested. Is that something you're open to?
yeah, if you don't mind just kind of explaining like what dark energy is and how it's a part of unity theory and how you tie it together.
Sure. So what I propose in unity theory is that Um, as we live in this holographic universe, mainstream science and quantum physics is starting to show and to prove that every aspect of this reality is the entire reality. And what that means is that everything is holodynamic, everything contains the whole within the dynamic of its makeup. And so we can think about that as a human by the way that we experience reality. How do we experience it? We experience it through our perceptions. And so through everything from, touch, taste, smell, hearing, sight, these five senses plus our sixth sense, our intuitive sensory perception, these senses make up the experience that we have in this reality with our environment. But this experience is inseparable from us. All of it exists within our mind, within the perceptions of our mind. And so everything is perception. Well, when I started to phase space reality, phase space meaning look at reality from a new third person objective perspective, I was able to realize that reality itself um, is based on these perceptions. So if we perceive an expanding universe, because that's what mainstream science tells us, then there is the possibility that it's not an expanding universe. And why do I say that? Because if we were to view it in that way, then the equal or equally the opposite is true. So if we can perceive that the universe is expanding, we could also say that everything within the universe is shrinking. And for the first time, by viewing it from that, let's say, backwards perspective, everything starts to make sense. If we realize that everything in this reality, in this universal container, let's say, is shrinking at the same rate, then nothing would be shrinking in comparison to something else. Like if Earth is shrinking in comparison to the sun, but the sun is also shrinking, then we wouldn't perceive any difference. But that would create the experience of this perceived expansion. And when we look at things from that perspective, then we can start to see exactly what gravity and dark matter are. Dark dark energy is the explanation of that expansion of the universe. So there's that one. Then dark matter is gravitational anomalies that scientists have suggested may exist. Most scientists can't even describe why dark matter would exist or what its purpose would be, but I propose that dark matter itself is space that is condensed specifically in these, let's say, tactical points within the universe to continue to direct the flow of each galaxy, each solar system, each planet. And when we realize that all dark matter is space, in specific condensed pockets, then we realize that that's all gravity is. Gravity is not an active force. Gravity is just the natural effect that we experience when everything is shrinking down into itself. So, as the planet is shrinking into itself, we are also shrinking and falling into that higher density space. And so it's not an easy concept to grasp. So I'm really excited that you were able to integrate it in one reading, Laura. But for those that can integrate that lesson and that realization, then everything begins to make sense. Because if we are energy, frequency, and vibration, which is what great scientists like Nikola Tesla proposed, then it makes sense that we are shrinking in order to create our perception of gravity, of an expanding universe. And when we realize that, we realize there's no such there's no possibility that things could be physical in the sense of physicality being separate from energy like we've been taught in most of mainstream education, mainstream science. And so when we break that illusion and we really integrate that everything is holodynamic, meaning everything contains the entire universe or the experience of the universe within their minds and their own being, then we realize that from a philosophical perspective, there's really no difference between the universe and what we would historically refer to as God. And so this reminds us of the power that exists within each and every one of us. The When we see through these patterns within patterns and we start to see how mainstream society is constructed, we can easily see that almost every single thing in mainstream society is institutionally built to keep us in what we would classify as a low vibration. Low vibrational energy is the energy that resonates in experiences such as fear or negativity. And high vibrational energies are elicited from love and compassion and um, positive aspects of reality. So when we realize that our society is built to keep us in low vibration, well, that just gives the whole show away. Then we realize that the reason that that must be happening is because the people that are quote unquote leading us know exactly how the universe works. They know
Hmm.
that the universe is holodynamic. They know that we can become, gods and goddesses with the little g. And that's what they're afraid of, because if this organization or these groups of organizations that can easily manipulate others through psychological suggestion, if they're discovered, if they're found out, and their agenda is made public, then they can no longer trick us into being conditioned slaves. And that's really what we're doing. The only difference between a employee and a slave is a wage. Well, what if we were to say that the universe is innately abundant? Then really there's no reason for us to be working as employees. There's no reason for us to become these slaves that are working for somebody else's agenda, somebody else's idea or company, because we would realize that everything that we've ever wanted at the individual level is right within our reach as long as we start reintegrating and implementing these concepts and these scientific truths of reality. And so that's what unity theory is about. I have it sitting right next to me. If any of your viewers want to learn more, they can find unity theory on my website, thecrimsoneagle.com, and it's available for free or love donation on there. This information is extremely important. It needs to get out to the people, and so that's my primary intent. But yeah, is there anything I didn't cover? Is there anything you want me to touch on, Laura?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really cool overview. And yeah, I think, I'm thinking of a few things. So recently, and a lot of news, as we know, is like fake or misleading for, from these agendas that you're talking about in the educational system, and the scientists and all that kind of stuff. And they say that CERN is reactivated, quote unquote. And I listened to a channel called Cosmic Agency that says they're trying to open a portal. It's for a dark reason. It's not about the Higgs boson particle, which is like the God particle. And how does this God particle relate to your theory and what you suspect might be going on with CERN?
Sure. So the God particle, to me, from what I understand about it, it is, I would equate it to a red herring in a story. So in stories and plots, red herrings are these ideas that are supposed to be misleading so that we start to pay attention to that rather than what's really going on. And I would say this whole God particle idea, could there be some special property to it that we don't understand that we could tap into? Absolutely. To me, there are infinite possibilities with everything. But in what have experienced so far regarding the information that's come to me about that, it's something that scientists can only replicate for a very, very, very brief moment of perceived linear time, and it's not something that can be very consistent to be even testable at this now moment. And so, to me, that's just something to keep people distracted. And in regard to CERN and their their true nature, like what's hiding beneath their surface value mission statement. Um, we see stuff like that in the movies. So if you look at the movies and you look at TV shows, a lot of people are living under this presumption and assumption that these things are fictitious, that they aren't real. But what unity theory proposes is that the only way that we could experience linear time in the way that we do and still have free will is if there was not just one timeline for humanity, but there are infinite timelines. And if there are infinite timelines, then that means if you can imagine something, not only is it possible, but it already exists among the infinite timelines that constitute reality. And so when we're looking through uh, TV screens and watching these movies and TV shows and these stories, we're looking into one of those real timelines. And just as real as this one is right now, all of those stories are real in their own right and unfold in their own reality. And so our brains can't tell the difference between real and fake. It just assumes everything is real because that is the truth at the end of the day. And in the movies and TV shows in which CERN is a part of the plot line, what I've noticed is that they're doing dark things. Like, for example,
Mhm.
there's this TV show, anime show called Steins Gate, and in Steins Gate, CERN is the one of the leading organizations attempting to recreate time travel. And
Hmm.
so in their experiments, they do things in which humans go missing or humans uh, are part of failed experiments in which they try to time travel and they end up dead. And there's a lot of darkness in that show regarding CERN. To me, the reason that all these TV shows and movies are available to us, it's not just for our entertainment. It's because of free will. If we are all the universe and each and every one of us holds the same ability to reach the highest level of authority possible in terms of reality or creation, then that means in order for us to allow certain things within this reality to unfold that are dark, we must be told the truth. And so whether they're telling us the truth outright in a conscious way, or they're telling the truth subconsciously or secretly, it doesn't matter. They just need to tell us the truth in order to get away with what they're doing. So when we're watching TV shows and movies, we're actually looking at uh, disclosure itself. We're looking at a reminder, a reflection of what we are capable of. So, all the Marvel TV shows and movies, all the DC ones, the comic book superhero movies, all of these things are showing us what we're actually capable of doing and ascending to. And so, in regard to CERN, I would say that my perspective on what's happening with that is that, yes, I think that there's most likely something very interesting and possibly dark going on you know, beneath the surface, behind the scenes with them. But the funny thing about that is we are shifting into a more higher vibrational sector of the galaxy and the universe right now, as our entire solar system is moving into that area. So, with that being said, I would say that every single dark experiment that they do, they're actually accidentally shifting us towards a better future. And what I mean by that is we're getting to the point where people that try and lie can't do it anymore. We're getting to the point where all these conspiracies that are not theoretical, that are very much conspiracies, they're starting to come to the surface. And there's nothing that the dark agenda can do to hide these things. So if they are trying to do some very dark experiment or ritual, or open a dark portal or whatever, every time that they tap into the amount of energy they need to do that, all that energy is actually under the surface, guiding things towards a better future, let's say. And so even if they're trying to do that stuff, I'm not worried about it one bit, because I'm just excited for everything that we've ever believed to be, science fiction to become reality. And that's going to happen within this lifetime, within our lives.
Great. You brought up a few things that make me think of other things now.
Mhm.
Yeah, so on a lot of spiritual channels, they're talking about the double slit particle experiment, which, a lot of
Mhm.
non-scientific people are bringing it up and referring to quantum physics. Do you have anything about the integration of that with unity theory, or how that, I guess, relates to, unity theory in any way? Because I guess the main thing is that, and I could be wrong, I'm not a scientist, but that it's showing a different perspective, that, that the particles are only shown from one perspective, and then you see some from another perspective, and then you see none, which is really
Mhm.
cool, because then it does show that, kind of like duality, yeah, we're all like, unified, but that we have that perspective. So my perspective might be these particles, and I experience, this reality one way, and then your experience is, another way, which is really cool, because it's kind of like both, we have this
Yeah.
individualistic. And so if you can just talk about that a little bit, because I don't know a lot about that experiment, and other than it might have to do with quantum physics.
Mhm. So I'm looking at my book right now, and in page 50, I talk exactly about this subject. So I say, though many quantum physicists would argue against it, the so-called observer effect supports this quantum interconnectivity of the universe through the interaction between the experimenter and experiment. And then I go right in the double slit experiment. And what I explain essentially is that when we are doing an experiment, regardless of if it's the double slit experiment or any other experiment, when our direct observation, we're not touching it, we're not messing with it in any other way other than just looking at it and observing it. When our observation directly alters the results of the experiment, that means that the experiment itself is aware that we are looking at it. That means if anything at that tiny let's say at quantum level, as small as we can go, when it reacts to us, then that tells us right there, boom, everything is consciousness. Because if it wasn't consciousness, then it couldn't be aware that I was looking at it. And so if everything is consciousness, then that means that that is the base of reality. It's not even energy. Yes, everything is energy and frequency and vibration, but that's just a way that we perceive and measure this energy, this experience. But when it comes down to the philosophical, logical, and scientific base of all things, it's simply awareness itself. Take, for example, if you had a tree, the classic, if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's around to hear it, did it make a sound? Well, yes, it made a sound. Why? Because the tree itself is consciousness and everything
Hmm.
around it is consciousness. Let's say, what if we changed that and we said, if a tree falls in the woods, but it's not made of consciousness, did it make a sound? And I would say no. In fact, it didn't even fall, because if it's not consciousness, there would be nothing communicating with it to explain to the rest of the reality that it's even there in the first place. So that means that consciousness is fundamental to the experience that's unfolding. But then this takes us to the next point in our thinking. If everything is consciousness, then that means consciousness determines reality. And if consciousness determines reality, then that means things even like probability aren't real. Probability is an idea that our collective consciousness here on Earth believes in. Since we believe in probability, that's exactly what we experience. But if consciousness is the base of reality, then we can choose through our conscious vibrations that we put out to either experience high vibration or low vibration. If the collective conscious decides to stop believing in probability, then all of us, like, let's say everybody on the planet said, you know what, probability's dumb, I'm done believing in it, and I'm just going to walk my path knowing everything's meant to happen the way it does. And that's exactly what we would experience. We could at that point, in that stage, from that point forward, we could say, I'm going to flip this quarter and it's going to land in heads, and every time it would land heads, because there would be no more probability. It only exists because we believe it does. And that takes us back to the 12 universal laws, the law of correspondence. What we think creates our reality. If we're in this sea of infinite timelines, then there's a timeline where probability doesn't exist, and there's a timeline where it does. So we just
Hmm.
simply shift our collective awareness, like we have done in experiences where we've had Mandela effect experiencers, where one thing in our collective past is remembered, even though in this current timeline, that collective past, that history has changed. In one example, Nelson Mandela died in the 1980s, and in this timeline, he lived until 2013. When I was a kid, The Sword and the Stone, the Disney movie about King Arthur, he pulls the sword from a literal stone. But in this timeline, he pulls it out of an anvil that's sitting on a stone. When I was a kid, my parents read the Berenstain Bears to me. Now they're spelled the Berenstain Bears. So
Mm.
these are just many examples of our capability to do this already. So once unity theory becomes mainstream, we will start to see some incredibly profound shifts happen for all of humanity. We're going to see, the dark agenda coming to the surface. We're going to see people, having to face that. We're going to see huge shifts in the economy, knowing that if the universe is abundant and we don't need to pay for anything, and people learn that, they're going to really contemplate and think, like, why am I playing with this monopoly money? What is the point of this? So a lot of people are going to immediately shift, like, I'm done doing that. I'm going to go live out on my farm, and I'm going to make my food and share it with my community who's also making food that I don't have. And then we're just going to see things melt away. Like the old can no longer work when the old is based in fraud. It's based in darkness and manipulation and psychology. And just a little side note, what is a psychological thing? It's something that is psychological. So if you are dealing with a psychopath in psychology, they claim that psychopaths are devoid of love. Well, what is psychology? It is psychological in the sense that it is logic that is devoid of the heart. It is entirely in focus on the mind. And so unless you have a very aware, therapist or behavioral health specialist who's aware of these things and aware of how reality works, a lot of the times when they're doing something like diagnosing a patient with, for example, ADD, they're actually telling the person that they have authority over that person's life, and they are saying to that person that they are experiencing ADD, and then that person starts going out telling everybody, "Yeah, I have ADD. I have this issue, and it's hard for me to stay calm." And then what do? They're tapping into the infinite timelines in which that's what their experience is. That's the law of correspondence. So the more that we start to see through the psychological tactics of the matrix and of the dark agenda, the more that we can realize that the truth exists within each and every one of us. And it's not something that we need from our external reality, because we are one with that reality. To get the truth, all we need to do is go within and connect with our heart, connect with our knowing. And it's gotten to the point for me where I am very conscious of what my mind is thinking and what my heart is feeling. And my heart may say something very simple, and then my mind has all these different ways of examining it and looking at it. But at the end of the day, if I trust my mind over my heart, I'm choosing to go on a detour timeline. I'm choosing to learn a lesson again. I'm choosing to have a more difficult experience, because I often say that hell is in the mind and heaven is in the heart. And for me, the greatest way to achieve the highest level of both the heart and the mind is to connect them both. Use the logic. Know that the heart is the captain and the mind is the sergeant. Know that we can allow our heart to lead us, but have our mind be this sort of assistant to back us up when we need a little extra oomph, for example. And so that's what unity theory is here to do. And I'm really excited to work with other scientists. I'm meeting more and more scientists in my experience of life, and we're all starting to come together. And specifically those that are heart centered. I've heard a lot
Yeah.
of different things about even some of the leading scientists and circles regarding the unified field theory. It
Field
sounds
theory.
like even within those circles, they're not unified in themselves. They're bickering with each other and trying to one up each other. But once you learn the truth about reality, there's no reason to compete, because I want you to win too. So that's where I'm at.
Oh, that's great. And yeah, I love how you mentioned the heart mind connection, because I have a government job, and I was told to get a shot that I do not want or I would be fired. And my mind of working in pharmacy in the Air Force for 6 years said, no, don't do that for several reasons. And, this is not, there's a lot of red flags here. And I also reached out to one of my pharmacist friends who I went to basic training with in 2000, and she confirmed that. And then my heart said, "Mark of the Beast." And I am not in any way a religious person, but I got
Mhm.
literally a download over and over and over again, "Mark of the Beast." And I said, okay, this is not a good agenda. This does not fit in my reality. So I'm going to reject it, and I'm going to, kindly ask for an accommodation in a professional manner, because I'm a professional. And it ended up working out, but of course I was on
Mhm.
pins and needles for a couple months, in that waiting
I bet.
period. So I really, and I was willing to, lose my job over that. And, so I know a lot of people unfortunately did and are going through that. And I have family members in the military who ended up doing it. And so in this being threatened, it's kind of like the carrot or the stick, but they were just mainly using the stick here. So
Yeah.
I was, since they went straight to that DEFCON 10, I was like, okay, that's a big red flag, because they didn't start out saying it nicely and flowery and like, hey, it's a suggestion, let's kind of like mention it for 6 months. And then they just went straight to the stick, rather
Yeah.
than the carrot. So there were a lot of red flags, and that's one of the reasons why I got out of the Air Force, so I could be autonomous and be sovereign and medical freedom and stuff like that. And I did not
Mhm.
think, I was a medic and I was in the military. So I read on your website that you were in the Army, you were a medic,
Mhm.
and I want to say thank you for your service. And if there's any insight that you have that helped you, I guess, get to your spiritual awakening from the military, because I know a lot of people unfortunately go through trauma in the military, but it propels their spiritual growth. So if you feel comfortable talking about any of that, do you mind sharing?
Sure. And I just want to commend you, Laura. That's amazing. And my heart is moved by your willpower and your ability to follow your heart and to listen within, because that is profound. There are a lot of people, like you're saying, that they just give in. They don't want trouble, and they let that little bit of fear take them to that next step down that detour timeline, or that timeline that can lead to darker things. And I appreciate you for not choosing that. I appreciate you for choosing the light and love, because every single person that does that is helping anchor in this new age called the age of Aquarius, this new golden age of humanity and of the awakening. So thank you for that. And in regard to my military career, interestingly enough, I was very asleep throughout most of it. But I didn't have any battlefield issues or situations like that. Thankfully, I didn't see action. I joined in late 2013 ish, and so from that period until about 2 years ago, I served, and it was an interesting experience. But for me, it was more so learning how the military mind works, how people within the military operate, how they treat each other, what the collective consciousness of the military is. And from my experience, it was kind of unique because I was a medic in an infantry unit. And so all the
Mm-hmm.
infantry soldiers were extremely rough around the edges. Like, some of them wouldn't even talk to me because I wasn't infantry. So they looked at me a certain way, and they kind of like looked down at me until I proved myself. And even when I did prove myself, there were sergeants and commanders and other higher ups that would sort of abuse their power and try and do things from a very egoic perspective. So I went through, what we could classify as hazing and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Being more of a feminine guy, I was called things like fag a lot and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I just had to deal with that and push forward through that. But all in all, everything that I went through, the more that I just believed in myself, the more that it worked in my favor. Um, and so in my experience in waking up after having my spiritual and scientific awakening, then I could see exactly why the military mind was that way. It was to beat down the femininity out of everyone, man or woman, and
Mm-hmm.
get them into that fully left brain masculine logic. you know don't look at the bigger picture, just look at the particle, the little tiny story that you're
Yeah.
boxed into, and be ready to kill people. And that was
Yeah.
always the primary thing. You're a soldier first and you're a medic second. Be ready to kill before you're ready to help. And that's just so backwards. I honestly don't think there's any reason I would ever kill anyone, even if I was trying to defend, because I believe that we can reach levels of power far beyond anything we've ever imagined if we choose to save life rather than to take it, even if that means saving the bad guy or whatever in the situation,
Mm-hmm.
because we are all one. We Because we live in this holodynamic holographic universe. I am the bad guy as much as I am Isaac. It's just it feels more real for me to be Isaac in my experiences with my body and my senses. But um, at this now moment, we're starting to realize that there is a level of power far beyond anything we've ever been taught. And it's really sad. It is really sad, Laura, because that means a lot of the things that happen to our fellow veterans, like those that have lost limbs and those that have gone through the most difficult experiences imaginable, we our the leaders of this world could help with that. They could help regrow limbs with spiritual technology. They could help fully heal these traumatized soldiers and veterans if they allowed the truth of reality to come forward. But they're specifically keeping it from coming forward. Why? Because every single disabled veteran, every single traumatized veteran with PTSD is another anchor point for this dark reality of war and suffering. And so they want the veterans to be stuck like that. And to me, that's the biggest slap in the face as someone that was in the army is the people that tricked me, because that's what they did. They lied to me and they said, you can become a part of something greater, something that helps the world, when really they're sitting at the top with, rubbing shoulders with all the people that are saying, all right, let's keep them as low vibrational as possible so we can manipulate and control them. But when we realize that it's the darkness that is causing the suffering within our life, our families' lives, everybody we've ever loved, then why would we ever support that? And so for me, it's just a no-brainer to like stay out of the military, to stay sovereign, and to that extent, I mean, when you sign all that paperwork, you're really literally signing parts of your life away. You're
Yeah.
creating a psychic contract that goes far beyond that piece of paper. And that's what we're starting to learn as well, is that our authority is ours as long as we claim it. And that's what we're doing in certain circles, such as the sovereignty movement, which I'm a part of. We are filling out what's called a live life claim, and one of the avenues of becoming fully sovereign or regaining our true sovereignty on this planet is through the David Wynn Miller process. David Wynn Miller was a plenipotentiary judge and uh, federal postal federal postal court judge, I believe. And he's since then passed away, but he created this technology called quantum syntax language. And quantum syntax language is showing the world that um, everything that we sign, everything that we read, and that we accept is us giving our authority away. It's us giving our power as a holodynamic being to another organization that may not have our best interests at heart. And so what do we do when we come into this planet? We stamp our footprint on a birth certificate. And so we're starting to see how that is a contract, and that how, if we are all God experiencing itself, then God can't force God to do anything that God doesn't want to do. So
Hmm.
everything that we are experiencing as a victim is because we're actually choosing it. We're actually giving our authority away. And we're doing that through these contracts. We're doing that through the birth certificate system and social security system. We're doing that every single time a police officer pulls us over and says, license and registration, please. And we start to go reach for it. The second we're reaching for that license and registration, we're saying, oh, you have authority over my story. But what we're starting to realize is that they don't. And I'm living this myself, through this myself. I've called judges out on the hearings through, I can't remember what it was. It was like a Zoom hearing. And I
Hmm.
told the judge straight to her face in front of 30 people, I said, you are lying, you are committing fraud, and you are breaking the law in front of all these people. And that judge holding her piece of paper was shaking because she knew the truth, that what she was doing
Hmm.
was immoral. It was psychologically manipulative and not correct in terms of having a true um, system based on information, integrity, and honesty. And so, um, yeah, one of the comments that came through: all our institutions are designed to maintain control for the matrix, and that's absolutely correct. And that's how they were constructed from the ground up. The English language is very crucial in our justice, quote unquote, justice systems,
Yeah.
because the English is essentially Babel from the Bible. In the story of Babel, this whole separation and division was created by the language, and that's exactly what English is. When you when you do what David Wood Miller did and decode the English language, you realize that certain words, when they are put into context by bringing up all the synonyms, all the similar words that mean the same thing, you start to see the patterns and you can decode the patterns. And so most words mean nothing. It literally says a double meaning in the word. One meaning is for your subconscious mind, and one meaning is for your conscious mind. So when we are told to submit a form to the government, our conscious mind says, "Oh, I just need to turn this form in, and that's it." But what they're saying to our subconscious mind is that we are submitting ourselves to their authority, and that's all built into the words. And so once we realize what the words mean, it becomes increasingly more precarious when we're trying to use those words to defend ourselves or to communicate. 99.9% of the time that I ever get into a quote unquote argument with someone is if there's a misunderstanding. Well, how does the misunderstanding arise? Because of the exact structure of the English language, because it's built to keep us separate, to catalyze us to be each other's enemies rather than working together as a team. I can't remember who it was, but a great teacher once said that he told a couple that they were allowed to argue as much as they want as long as they didn't use words. And the second that they tried that for the first time, they just looked at each other and they started laughing. They're like,
That's funny.
how can I argue if I'm not using words? And that's the whole point. If you don't use English, you're not going to need a reason to argue because nobody's going to misunderstand you. You're going to communicate non-verbally or eventually telepathically, and
Yeah.
then everything becomes very clear. And when we communicate in that sense, it's all about teamwork. We're all in this together. We're all each other's neighbor. And I really like that perspective. It's that Dr. Victor Vernon Wolf, author of Holodynamics and great inspiration leader and scientist, he explained that universalizing our concepts and our idea of love and compassion is taking that love and reminding ourselves that since we are in this holodynamic universe, not only should we love our neighbors, but realize that everyone is our neighbor, from the people across the planet to the ants that are on the anthill. Every single being, every single plant and animal, every elemental, every bit of earth, wind, fire, and water, all of that is our neighbor, our friend, our family. And remembering that, that allows us to access greater collective consciousnesses. For example, if you are part of mankind, but mankind's collective consciousness is, mistreats nature, then nature isn't going to work with that collective consciousness. It's not going to resonate. But what if pockets of mankind or, individuals start to really work with the land and show appreciation and go into ceremony and do, use spiritual practices to connect to that consciousness, then you have a group of people that's working with the collective consciousness of every plant and animal and every piece of this entire planet that we're riding on. That's a huge amount of conscious awareness and energy that can help us to co-create a better future. And so, yeah, I kind of went off on a tangent there, but I hope that answered your question.
No, yeah, no, that was a good tangent, and thank you for sharing all your experiences in the military. I know that's not always easy to do, even years after the fact. I was in during September 11th and got out in '06, and your
Mhm.
story sounds similar to a lot of airmen and soldiers that I know. So it's
Mhm.
good to talk about these things and bring them out and to bring awareness that these things are happening. And I 100% agree with the breaking you down to build you up to be on the masculine side and basically obliterate my feminine side. And I had a lot
Mhm.
of issues with that over the years until I had an awakening. And I feel like that experience did propel an awakening for me, as it does for many. So it wasn't like it was in vain. But one thing that I also picked up that when you were talking about probability, So basically, that means that there are no coincidences because the probability is just part of the, I guess, the illusion,
Hmm.
of the ether of the matrix. So recently, I just started thinking that too. That there are no coincidences. So I think that's really cool that you brought that up. And if you have time for one more question, the law of one was like a big thing. I think it came out with Kathy Reichert, I want to say is her name, from the 80s. And she was
Hmm.
doing channeling with beings from Venus and talking about basically the law of one, is a big deal because it's saying that we're part of everything. And like you were saying right now, segues into that, the plant, the neighbor, is our neighbor, dogs,
Hmm.
the air, everything is actually unified. Everything is one and one source, if, you want to say it that way. Um, and there's a physicist. I think his name is, I can't say his name, Nassim Haramein, I think
Hmm.
is his name. He talks about this a lot on Gaia and off Gaia. How does the law of one, is the law of one just kind of like a prequel to the unity theory?
Yeah, so the law of one and unity theory, I would say, are both perspectives of the same universal truth. And that's also in line with holodynamics. I mention holodynamics a lot, and it's because Dr. Wolf's work is very much entangled with my own as unity theory, um, because that's the best way to describe it. Holodynamic means the whole dynamic. So
Yeah.
as Rumi said, a great poet, famous poet, he said, "We are not a drop in the ocean. We are the ocean in a drop." And that's what I was kind of touching on. When you think about everything outside of yourself is experienced in your mind, everybody lives that in that way. And that's how we are the all connected to the one source, is because we are all that same experience of the divine mind, as it's referred to in the seven hermetic principles. And so the law of one, from what I understand, that's more related to like the raw material and like
Mhm.
Egyptian knowledge, but that's just another perspective of this universal truth. The thing about a lot of these other perspectives, though, is that they aren't scientifically qualified, and that's something that our reality, our people on this planet are really looking for, is they need something to connect the dots to say, okay, this isn't just woo woo, this is real. And so
Yeah.
that's the thing that unity theory does first and foremost, better than any other theory I've ever witnessed. So they may have these answers, they probably do have these answers, but they haven't been released to the public before until now. And that's what I can offer through unity theory. And as much as I love Dr. Wolf's work in holodynamics, the one thing that's different between his explanation and mine is that although it is universal truth and intuitive knowledge that he tapped into and shared with the world, there wasn't quite that scientific connection to say, okay, here's why it's happening.
Yeah.
Here's why that works the way it does. But he did have many different evidential um, situations that described exactly how all the things that he was sharing in his books were true and how they worked, and he had proof that they worked. But I feel that for most people isn't enough. Most people want to
Yeah.
know, like for example, a computer may work for one certain process that somebody wants to use a computer for, but if you try to show a whole civilization that computers are real and that they're technologically advanced, if they don't understand what the computer is, they might just completely not resonate with it and be like, no, that's like demonic or something. I don't want to touch that. But once they understand, it's just the electricity running through, it's something that we programmed, this thing doesn't have a mind of its own, yada yada yada, then that civilization that's foreign to the concept of a computer would be like, okay, we'll give it a shot, because they can understand it. And so that's kind of where we're at, in humanity, is people are looking for the true explanation as to how the universe works, so that they can finally give
Yes.
themselves that scientific permission slip to believe in the, let's say, supernatural, um, and things beyond what we have been taught to be normal. And so that's what unity theory is. And I don't beat around the bush with it, Laura. I mean, some people look at me in a certain light because of the certainty that I carry within me. I've been often projected upon as being naive or arrogant in thinking that I know these things. But what it comes down to is when I describe things about unity theory to people who are actually listening, they can't find a way to argue against it. It's completely infallible, logically speaking, and I'd love to meet someone that can argue against it and say, "Oh, this is wrong," because that means I can grow. That means that I can refine that part of the theory and bring it to the people in a better way. And so, with that being said, from my current awareness with what I've discovered and what I'm here to share with the world, I am furthering Einstein's work. I am uh, releasing the first theory of everything that explains fundamentally what dark matter, dark energy, and gravity are and how they work, how time works, and how time is essentially an illusion that doesn't exist but is very real to our experience. I describe all of these things. I describe free will, how free will is a paradox that exists and does not exist depending on the perspective. I go into everything and then take it all back to the heart and how within the 0 point of our auric field, our heart is where the infinite possibilities exist. And to tap into that is a very profound and powerful thing. And lately, I've been learning more and more that tapping into that is tapping into our femininity. As
Mhm.
Dr. Wolf describes in holodynamics, the left brain is linear, it's logical, and it's masculine. The right, oh, excuse me, the right brain is nonlinear, it is intuitive and emotional, and it is quantum, meaning that here's the particle, here's the wave. And so that wave corresponds to our heart, and the left brain, that particle, corresponds to our mind and what our mind is capable of doing and helping us with. And so unity theory is the first theory of everything to
Yeah.
cover all of these topics and to give the people of Earth a clear, scientifically logical perspective to move forward with in their own lives that will benefit them directly. And that's what we need is remembering our true power and bringing the whole collective consciousness of this planet to the same page so that we can anchor in you know, the time for heaven on earth. And thinking back to what you mentioned about prophecy, I want it to be clear that if we exist within a sea of infinite possibilities and infinite timelines, then what prophecy is are the anchor points of the story that we've all collectively chosen. So
Mhm.
that's why I would explain that your heart was telling you mark of the beast over and over again in your situation, because even if you didn't believe in that or felt religious in that way, that mark of the beast is a key point of the prophecies of the story that's unfolding. What's the number one book ever read by people? It's the Bible.
Bible.
And
Yeah.
so, how many people have put energy into that prophecy? It's only a matter of linear time before it manifests. And with the rate that things are progressing, and with certain things within prophecy that are already coming to fruition right now, we are living in those times. For example, they say in the book of Revelation that the four horsemen are pestilence, war, famine, and death. Well, what is COVID 19? What is uh, Ukraine?
Yeah.
What is the food shortages that have been going on and happening mysteriously? Suddenly, these farms and these facilities are burning to the ground.
Yeah.
Well, there's another one that hasn't fully happened yet or come to the collective consciousness awareness. So we're in these steps that are unfolding that are all tied to these nodes, let's call them these time nodes that are anchor points for the experience that we're all collectively choosing. And so with that, without further ado, I mean that's unity theory in a nutshell. And if there's any last questions, I'm open to it. But I feel like we've covered a lot today.
Yeah, we did. Thank you so much for your insight. And, as to, I met you in person in Mount Shasta. You have amazing energy. I do not get any arrogance or anything. I just get a very simple, well thought out, laid out explanation in your book that was very straightforward. And I use it as a reference. I can go back and say, well, what did that one thing say about that free will? Because free will is a big thing, especially right now. And
Hmm.
if you have any last words about how people can manifest to hang in there, I guess, so to speak, and experience a more positive timeline because of
Hmm.
inflation, and the financial system, being trapped in the financial system is a big one, I think, for most people. If there's any just a last few words you want to add to integrating and getting to that, I guess, manifestation of the better timeline, which I feel it's like really close, like you said, like the prophecies being fulfilled.
Right.
I think we're at a tipping point. We're like this on the mountain. We're about to go, another way, in a good way. So,
Yeah, yeah.
um, yeah. So if you have anything to add, and then we'll call it a day.
Sure. So I have two points to leave our viewers with. And the first one is that everything in reality is patterns. So if everything is pattern based, then when we recognize the patterns in our life, whether they're positive or negative, we can take responsibility for what's happening. So, for those of us that don't believe in the holodynamic universe, that don't believe in interconnectivity and oneness, we are, for the most part, stuck in cycles of fear and negativity and suffering, lack, limitation. And if that's what people want to experience, then that's totally their choice. But for me, I'm done with that. I'm ready for
Mhm.
happiness. I'm ready for a good life. And so, for those that are ready to move beyond that and implement the holodynamic properties of this universe into their own lives, I recommend paying attention to patterns. When we see a pattern, for example, um, in my life, I had this pattern with women where, because with my eldest sister, she never thought that I was good enough or that I was always getting into trouble and I was being viewed as this bad guy. And so, in my patterns with women earlier in my life, I had this experience where I was viewed as the bad guy in every situation with whatever
Mhm.
romantic interest I had or any situation I found myself getting close to a woman. And I couldn't figure out why that kept happening to me. And I felt like this victim. But then when I realized it's because it was that part of me that felt like was under scrutiny and was the bad guy and was afraid of being the bad guy, I realized that I was consciously or subconsciously choosing to have that experience. And when I
Mhm.
stopped caring about what certain people thought of me, specifically regarding those interactions, finally, all the women in my life started reflecting back to me. I'm this great guy, and I'm
Mhm.
like, yeah, that's the guy that I've always been. I was just afraid of not being that guy, which caused it to manifest. And so fear is something that opens the door to negativity and to lessons and to suffering. And so once we start becoming aware of where we're putting our fear or where we're allowing it to run part of our lives, then we can see the pattern that's manifested and take responsibility for the decision to create that on the soul level for ourselves to be able to learn and grow. And then with that responsibility, we can take back our authority and we can say, you know what, I'm not this bad guy. I know who I am. This is what I'm meant to do and who I'm meant to be. And I'm not going to do this in a way that's painful for myself and other people. And the more that we do that with every single pattern in our life, it gets to the point where all the patterns are updrafting, meaning they're all affecting us positively. They're opening doors for us within our experience that all we have to do are just walk through, and we see the truth of reality reflected back to us. And then that takes me to the second point is that in my book, I don't think I refer to it in my book as this way, but I call it my spiritual compass. And what it is a principle to live by. If anybody watching this wants to see the universe reflect love back to them, then there is one simple guideline to follow. Always choose unconditional love over fear, first towards the self within one's mind, and then towards everyone and everything else outside of the self. And if you do it in that order specifically with absolute accountability and 100% honesty with yourself and with the people around you, then you will naturally reprogram your ego mind, your linear mind, to become in alignment with your heart. And that what is exactly what will establish the heart mind connection and take you to, what is that to me? The middle path. That's what Buddha used to talk about. And in that middle path, all things work in our favor. We reach the highest levels of abundance and soul family and prosperity. And every dream that we've ever felt we were meant to accomplish will naturally unfold right before our eyes. And everything becomes this miraculous, mystical adventure. And that's the true way we're meant to experience life. The reason that any of us came here down to this reality to experience what it's like to be a human is to add some depth to that experience. When everything's going great and everything's perfect, then there isn't a lot of context to appreciate that perfection. But for those of us specifically in this time, this exciting time for humanity, we get to feel what it's like to be in that darkness, but to come back to the light and to have that level of depth of perception when it comes to this whole grand experience is truly, truly a gift. So those are the 2 points that I'll leave the viewers with. And man, it's just been a wonderful time this morning with you, Laura. I'm so appreciative and grateful to be here with you and share this moment with you. And I look forward to, your interviews getting bigger and bigger, more viewers coming along, and you deserve it. And I'm excited to see where your path takes you.
Oh, thank you, Isaac. Your words are like a metaphysical symphony and make my heart sing. I definitely
Mm.
feel the heart connection. And I'm so happy that you brought up unconditional love because one of my advice pieces to anyone that'll listen about spiritual, work and stuff is that unconditional love starts from within. If
Mhm.
you can, forgive yourself and all that, do your inner work and get to unconditional love from within, then it has no choice but to radiate without, So
Exactly.
I really love that. I love the unconditional love piece that you said there. And I thank you so much for your time. I look forward to all of your new projects. And I literally want your theory in all the school books. So I really look forward to, you being on Gaia TV or in a school book or,
Mm.
you really do deserve exposure here because you're really onto something and it really makes sense. And I'm really looking forward to hearing about experiments proving all of your theory, which is a theory of everything. And that's how I see it too.
Mm.
So I'm so excited for you. And thank
Awesome.
you so much for your time and have a great day.
Thank you so much and have a great day yourself. And anybody watching this, thank you all for being you and bringing what you have to the table. I mean, just the fact that you exist implies that the rest of the universe believed you were that important that we couldn't move forward without you. So thank you. And everybody have a wonderful day. Much love, Laura.
Thanks. Much love, Isaac. Take care.